Tanya Grambower runs a learning program called Literacy for Boys, and she's been invited to speak at the World Literacy Summit in Oxford next year. If she's good enough for Oxford, she's good enough for me. Welcome back to the studio. Thanks for coming in. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Steve.
Boys in particular, sometimes a little bit hard to get into reading. Is there a reason why that is?
Well, there's so many factors, really, Steve, but it is really difficult to get boys connected to books. So part of our conversation today, I think if our listeners can understand that if your children witness you reading, that sends a message to them that you value reading. So there's so many ongoing wonderful consequences of adults reading, and that's definitely one of them.
One of the joys of my life was sitting on the steps of my house when my daughter was very young, but in my lap I started reading to her Dostoevsky. She has no idea what I was reading, but it was just one of those happy moments as a dad. I was reading it for myself. She was way too young to understand it, but it was just a happy moment. And there is something wonderful about having the time or making the time to read.
All the evidence too says that the benefits of oral reading to our children is very, very profound. So right up until they're 10 years old, it doesn't need to be, baby books or picture books. You can just read a chapter aloud to them. So my message, even with teachers at schools, is if you can find some time to orally read in front of the class, it has a lot of benefits as well.
What are the benefits or the health benefits of a reading habit, of a healthy reading habit?
Really, it's a good thing to de-stress, I think, and particularly if you can get into that habit in the evenings of just switching off the TV. We're all guilty of scrolling on our phones. But I would suggest anybody here who's listening who's really out of the habit of reading or puts himself in the category of the non-reader, there's lots of ways that you can get back into reading. One of them would be, we've just talked about TV. If you set yourself a goal that tonight I'm actually going to spend 10 minutes or 15 or 30 minutes less time watching TV, and instead I'm going to go to bed and I'm going to read that book or read it on the couch. So just little increments can help form a habit.
So start small if you have to.
Definitely, definitely. Finding a book is a massive obstacle for a lot of people, a book that interests you. I would suggest the independent bookstores, the staff there are so knowledgeable on whatever interest you may have. They'll point you in the right direction. So that would be a place to start. I'd also tell your listeners that remember that our city libraries, they're our taxes. We're paying for those. So you should use them. They're free, in that they're, indirectly free. And also, their staff are wonderful in helping you with finding any interests, and they can link you with a book. So there's an app that the Brisbane City Library app is amazing. So that I would suggest to readers if you were able to pre-book ahead some books. This morning, Steve, I was just on my phone and the latest Brisbane City Library app has something called a reading tracker. And you can record pages, the minutes, the hours, the books. It's a great novelty. I just came across it, an hour ago, and I thought that might be a tip that we can give your readers, that they can actually just measure their, increments of reading, and then you get a sense of satisfaction of recording that.
So that's the Brisbane City Library is the Brisbane Council Library, but in the heart of the CBD, or in George Street, is that the one?
No, your local.
Okay. So for all of them, okay.
Absolutely. So what you would do is you go onto the Brisbane City Library app. You can nominate which books you'd like to order, and then you can say which community library you'd like to pick them up from.
Wow. Okay.
As easy as that.
So it's called what's it called? If I go to an app store, I'll have to type in Brisbane City Library
City Library app. I think it is.
Okay.
Brisbane City Library or Brisbane Council Library. I think it might be.
Okay.
They will find it. Your readers will be able to find that.
My guest is Tanya Grambower. She runs a learning program called Literacy for Boys. She's heading off to the World Literacy Summit in Oxford next year. We've grabbed her before she heads off. What are the barriers that get in the way of reading? I'm thinking, so I'm an adult male, I love reading, but to me the barrier is head tiredness. Like, this job is a very cerebral job, and then I have other responsibilities when I go home. So I actually feel like a tiredness in my head and my eyes.
I agree. I think we're all in that boat. And so don't be afraid to just read sort of something mindless. Like, I think you have to give yourself permission that you just want something light to read. I want to share a lovely quote that one of my best friend's mums has said to me. So I've always been, don't waste your time on a bad book. But she says, read the number of pages according to your age. So if you are 65, you should allow 65 pages into a book before you decide whether it's worth reading or not. And I wanted to share that with you today because I thought it was something fun. So that, don't waste time on a book that you're not enjoying. Time's too short for that, and that's not going to develop your reading interest at all.
I have a friend, and she says, if the book doesn't capture me by the first page, it goes one side. She says, life's too short. First page, you've either got me or you don't have me.
I know. Well, I'm probably a bit more forgiving. I probably tend to get into one or two chapters.
All right. Reading selection. Do I still get my bookworm points if I'm cracking open a copy of Britney Spears' memoir versus, The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky or something?
I think so, definitely. And don't disregard audiobooks. Another piece of advice that I'd like to give people, if they feel like they need that motivation to read, maybe tap into what your children or grandchildren may be reading, whether that's for school or interest. Our high school kids are actually reading some really great books that are a mixture of classics, but those that are quite pertinent to, a cultural or social issue at the moment. So that might be a nice way to connect with that next generation.
I found with my daughter, funnily enough, that her school got her reading with dystopian novels, which I thought, it's a bit... But she loved them. It actually got her reading.
Definitely.
Which was interesting. Okay, so stop being such a prude, Steve, and let her read what she wants.
Definitely. I think so. Book clubs are another great idea. Now, I've actually joined a couple of book clubs, and I can say that I've turned up and I haven't even read the book. So don't hold that back from you. But the reason I mention book clubs is they're actually just a great way to discuss things. Right. And those conversations. So you're discussing
ideas, concepts, dreams.
And remember that you will be meeting with, like-minded people who can actually point you in the direction of other books. It also pushes you out of your comfort zone, really. Sometimes it depends how they're run. It might be somebody who selects the book, and you might, again, think that's not really my thing, but it does push you into reading and being accountable to trying to finish that book.
My guest is Tanya Grambower. We're talking reading and getting back into the habit. Jimmy says, it always makes me smile when I hear somebody mispronounce a word. It means they learnt the word by reading and not by simply by hearing the word. Jimmy, thank you. Kimberly says, can I please ask my reading guest how to encourage those to read who have dyslexia, who basically have developed a fear of reading because it's been so difficult for them due to their dyslexia. Thanks so much, says Kimberly. Can you help Kimberly?
Oh, Kimberly, I work with so many learners who have, reading obstacles like dyslexia. I think what a nice... they need to build their confidence with actually having a book. So what you might want to do is consider the idea of combining an audiobook, a downloaded audiobook, with the actual text form so that your child can read along and listen, and that will help, I think, build a better relationship with an actual paper copy book. So I would try that as
That's a good idea.
Point.
So don't be ashamed to have the audiobook.
Not at all.
Okay. And almost alternate between the two to sort of build their confidence in some way.
Definitely. And try and use that carrot stick of, is there an upcoming Netflix series or is there an upcoming movie that has an attachment to that book? And that can also be another reward, for reading the book. One
of my listeners sent, my library app is called Libby, Libby. And one of the amazing librarians at Sunnybank Hills actually installed it for me. So there you go. I've not heard of this one, but there we go.
Yes.
Where can people find books that will hold their attention and keep screen time temptation at bay? Like, it's often, I often find a book that I love reading, but I stumble across it. It's by accident.
So in coming here today, I was really brainstorming ways that I could help your viewers. I've got a couple of suggestions. So there's endless websites, but there's a really good reading guide. That's a great one. The other thing is, if you get your weekend papers, there's always a section on great books.
Yep.
They will give you a really clear synopsis about what it's like, and they will cover everything. So they will have an autobiography section. They'll have new fiction, new non-fiction, fans who just purchase magazines such as Who Weekly or Women's Weekly here, they will always have featured books. So that's actually a really good starting point because somebody's already done the research for you, picked out the best of the best. So I would suggest that's another starting point just to get you started.
It always helps, I think, if you can develop a relationship with a bookshop.
Correct.
And they get to know you and they can say, hey, have you thought of this one? And I say, why? And they say, well, here's what it's about, or here's the author, and here's what they're talking about, or here's their backdrop, or this book was relevant to the recent the literary controversy. Nothing I like more than a literary controversy to get you into the book.
The bookstores too, remember, they're also they're a wonderful resource that we can support. So, in any business that we can send their way, but they truly are remarkable resources, human resources, the staff at those bookstores.
The lift out in the Weekend Australian newspaper is good.
Correct.
And the Friday Financial Review has a lift out, which actually, they're more high end, but they're sometimes very business-like, but actually got some good recommendations in the lift out of the Friday Financial Review. My guest, Tanya Gramboa, runs a learning program called Literacy for Boys. If I have the opposite problem where I'm too good at acquiring books and I've got a stack of them and I've not actually read them because I don't have the time, I need some time management strategies perhaps for getting into and reading them, Tanya.
Well, I think it's about habit, if you can.
Oh, that's that habit thing
again. It is. And the other thing I wanted to tell your listeners too is if you do get into that habit of even half an hour before bed, it really does help to switch off your brain. All those stresses of the day, our minds are whirring all the time with things we've got to do. Reading will take you into another place that really will just shut your mind down, and I think it really contributes to a better night's sleep.
I've heard that. So if you can de-stress or declutter your brain with a book, you'll actually sleep better, so you'll actually wake the next day, hopefully.
I'm a big believer in that, definitely.
Right. All right. What are you reading at the moment, can I ask?
Well, I just finished, my daughter did The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. I really enjoyed
I've heard
that.
of it. I don't know it, but I've heard of it.
It's a good classic, and I love that the school chose that our young girls, teenage girls, could also identify with that. So I really, really enjoyed that. I do love any books by Kristen Hanna. She's another go-to author of mine that I just think is amazing. But I will
Kristen Hanna, is it?
Yes.
With Kristen with a K?
Kristen with a K, Kristin, Hanna. All of her books I've thoroughly enjoyed. Biographies, historical fiction might be another one, that a lot of your male viewers listeners may enjoy. That's the genre where it actually takes an historical event. So that is true, but the fiction around it just makes it really more enjoyable. So I can recommend that as well as a really good genre to get into.
You happy if we take a call?
Yes.
Katrina of Bellbird Park, what's on your mind?
I messaged in saying how I'm reading a book that my granddaughter actually suggested. It's a series, The Fourth Wing, and I'm onto the second one, The Iron Flame. And we have so much fun actually talking about it together and seeing, where the book's going and what's happening in it and the characters. So it's a great thing to actually, like she said, to read some of the books that your children or grandchildren might be reading and, getting into it with them.
So you're reading this to your granddaughter is deepening your connection with your granddaughter by the sounds of it.
No. She's older.
I'm sorry, my apologies.
So she has read the book and she advised me about it.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
And so, but it's a series, so we're waiting for the third one of this series comes out in January. But we're constantly sort of going about the characters in it, what they're doing, what's happening. It gives you a great conversation with your grandchildren, especially when they're in teenagers,
Yes.
Sometimes getting conversation out of them is difficult at all.
It's the Rebecca Yaros series, I think. Thanks very much.
That is wonderful. That is absolutely perfect. That's an illustration of where you can start. So that's great.
Is there a way? Pete says sometimes one needs to stick with a tough book. It pushes the boundaries of knowledge, which is probably true.
It is, yes. It depends, I guess, how time poor you are. Whether you're, if you're trying to get into reading, that's probably not the advice I'd give, but perhaps the book has become recommended to you, perhaps it's in a series and you just need to keep pushing on, and maybe it's the third book that's not grabbing you, but there's pros and cons of that.
So start small, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, build it up to 30 minutes of reading time to get into the habit.
Definitely. Just try and form that habit. I think that's the best way to just start with a good book.
All right. I have a failing. I read masses of non-fiction, but I find it difficult as a bloke to read fiction. Why is that, Tanya?
Well, I can give an example. So my husband's not a big reader, but he is actually following a book that my son is. And again, it's like your earlier caller suggested. That is their connection point at the moment. It's not a book he would have picked up, but his motivation, that's the key. His motivation is to read alongside our son. So it's a really, the motivating factor can be a big part of that.
Sharon, what got you reading more books?
The 50 cents fare on the train. I'm actually reading a book a week on the train going to work.
So you've got the time on the train in a sense?
Yes, I do. So I used to be a great reader before, and this has just opened up that passion again, shall we say.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, when I was living on the Gold Coast some years back, I was reading on the train into Brisbane, and it was pure joy having that time to read on the train. But I see an awful lot of people reading their mobile phone on the train or what have you.
So I love what your lady caller has just mentioned then. So we usually refer to that as something like incidental reading.
Right.
So those are the moments, if you're waiting to pick up children from sport, if you're waiting to meet a friend from coffee, if you have that book with you, have it in your bag, your work bag, those are opportunities where you can just sneak in 5 minutes. But if you have a book with you, you're waiting in line for something, or you're on the train, or transport's a good example. So those are examples of incidental reading, which again will help form that habit. But have the book with you, and that helps.
So don't have the mobile phone in hand, have the book in hand. So actually in a sense, it's a discipline of taking a book out with you when you're going somewhere.
Correct. And also I'd say, in developing a habit of reading, use your library app to pre-book books, but if you finish one, make sure you have another one on your bedside table, because that helps to develop that. Otherwise, you may fall out of that reading habit.
When do you head off to Oxford?
Early next year. So we are March next year.
Okay, I want to grab you back in the studio before you go and talk again. Thanks for coming in once again.
Thank you, Steve.
Tanya Grambower. She runs a learning program called Literacy for Boys. She'll be speaking at the World Literacy Summit in Oxford next year. We'll try and get her back in the studio in 2025 before she heads off overseas.